Picture this. It's 1956, and a Ford dealer mechanic in Toledo, Ohio, walks into his service bay with a hacksaw, a chunk of phenolic resin plastic worth maybe $3, and an idea that would embarrass Ford's entire engineering department. Within a week, farmers are pulling loads their trucks weren't rated for. Within a month, drag racers are setting records. Within a year, Ford's engineering department is quietly studying what one mechanic did with pocket change that their million-dollar research facility somehow missed. Ford's overhead valve transition. Let's rewind to 1954. Ford had just killed the Flathead 5M8, the engine that had powered everything from hot rods to tractors since 1932. In its place came the Y block, Ford's first overhead valve, V8 for passenger cars. Detroit was calling it Progress. Customers were calling it something else entirely. The Y block, on paper, looked great. The 239 cubic inch version made 130 horsepower, which was actually decent for 54. The optional 272 made 161, better than the old Flathead by a mile. But there was a problem nobody at Ford wanted to admit. The low-end torque was pathetic. See, Ford's engineers had designed the Y block for highway cruising. This was the interstate era. Americans wanted smooth, quiet engines that could maintain 60 miles per hour all day long. What they didn't want, apparently according to Ford's market research, was grunt, pulling power, torque down low, where normal people actually use their engines. The Y block made decent power at 4,000 RPM. Great, wonderful. Except most people drove at 1,500 to 2,500 RPM. At those speeds, the Y block felt asthmatic. Farmers trying to pull hay wagons complained it lugged down. Contractors with loaded pickups said it felt gutless off the line. Boat owners reported that their F-Series trucks struggled with trailer loads that the old Flathead had handled without complaint. Ford's response was predictably corporate. They told dealers to inform customers that modern overhead valve engines were designed for higher RPM operation. They suggested drivers downshift more often. They published revised towing capacity numbers that were, let's be honest, lies dressed up as engineering updates. The message was clear. The engine is fine. You're using it wrong. Dealers were furious. They were the ones dealing with angry customers. They were the ones watching sales decline as word spread that Ford's new modern engine was actually worse for real work than the ancient Flathead it replaced. Some dealers started steering customers towards Chevrolet, which had its own overhead valve issues but at least had better low-end characteristics. Enter Ray Brock, forgotten, genius from Toledo. Into this mess walks Ray Brock. Not the Ray Brock who later became famous as an editor at Hot Rod magazine. Different guy. This Ray Brock ran the service department at a small Ford dealership in Toledo. He was nobody's idea of an engineering genius. High school education, trade school, 30 years of turning wrenches. He wore the same oil-stained coveralls every day. His hands were permanently stained with grease. He was exactly the kind of guy Detroit engineers looked down on. But Brock had something Ford's engineers didn't. He had to look his customers in the eye when their trucks didn't work right. He had to explain to farmers why their new F-100 couldn't pull what their old 48 could. He had to watch contractors choose Dodge over Ford because word had gotten around. And unlike Ford's engineering department, Brock actually gave a damn about solving the problem. The discovery happened by accident, which is how most great discoveries happen. Brock was working on a customer's 272 Y block that had a cracked intake manifold gasket. While he had the carburetor off, he noticed something. The intake runners on the Y block were designed with this weird plenum under the carburetor. Ford's engineers thought this would help mixture distribution. What it actually did was create a dead space where fuel could puddle and air velocity would drop. Brock had read somewhere, probably in one of those cheap hot rod magazines, about carburetor spacers. The idea was simple. Put a spacer between the carburetor and intake manifold to give the air-fuel mixture more room to mix. Most people thought this was just for racing engines. Brock wondered if it might help with the low-end torque problem. He didn't have a fancy phenolic spacer. He had a chunk of Bakelite, that old plastic they used to make radio cases. He cut it with a hacksaw into a 1-inch thick disc, drilled holes for the carburetor bolts, and shaped the center opening to match the carburetor throat. Total cost in materials? Maybe $3. Time invested? An hour during lunch. He bolted it on, fired up the engine, and immediately noticed something. The idle was smoother. The throttle response felt crisper. But the real test was under load. He called the customer, a farmer named Ed Wilson, who'd been complaining about his truck's lack of pulling power. Wilson came in skeptical. He'd heard all of Ford's excuses about modern engines needing higher RPM. They hooked up a hay wagon, the same one Wilson said his truck struggled with. Wilson hit the gas. The truck moved, no lugging, no hesitation. Just smooth, strong pull from idle. Wilson looked at Brock like he'd just witnessed a miracle. "What did you do?" "Just a small modification," Brock said, "no charge." The $5 trick revealed word spread faster than a brush fire in August. Within a week, Brock had a line of Ford truck owners wanting the same modification. He refined the design. Instead of Bakelite, he found a supplier of proper phenolic resin spacers for $2 each. He charged customers $5 installed, $1 markup, $2 labor. Highway robbery by 1956 standards. But here's where it gets interesting. Brock noticed something else. The spacer helped, but it wasn't doubling torque like some customers claimed they were feeling. There had to be something else going on. He started experimenting. Different spacer heights, different carburetor jets. Nothing made as much difference as that first installation on Wilson's truck. Then he remembered. Wilson's truck had been running rough before the manifold gasket failed. Brock had adjusted the distributor while he was in there. Specifically, he'd modified the advance curve. Not much. Just recurved the springs and adjusted the initial timing. He'd done it almost automatically, part of his standard tuning procedure. He grabbed another customer truck, installed just the spacer, modest improvement. Then he modified the distributor advance curve, bringing in the mechanical advance quicker and limiting the total advance. Combined with the spacer, the transformation was dramatic. Off-idle torque didn't just improve, it felt like a different engine. The technical explanation is actually simple, though Ford's engineers somehow missed it. The Y-block's combustion chamber design required a very specific relationship between mixture velocity and ignition timing to make power at low RPM. The factory setup was optimized for highway speeds where air velocity was naturally higher. The spacer did two things. First, it increased the distance between the carburetor and intake valve, giving the air and fuel more time to mix. Second, and more importantly, it increased mixture velocity at low throttle openings. The longer column of air-fuel mixture moving through the spacer created a slight ram effect, even at low RPM, but mixture velocity alone wasn't enough. The Y-block needed the spark to occur earlier in the compression stroke to fully utilize that improved mixture. The factory distributor advance curve was too conservative, too slow to bring in advance. It was designed to prevent detonation on the cheapest gas available, which meant it left power on the table everywhere else. Brock's distributor modification did three specific things. He lightened the advance springs so mechanical advance came in sooner. He limited the total advance to prevent detonation at high RPM. And he increased initial timing by 4 degrees. This meant that at low RPM, the improved mixture from the spacer was igniting at exactly the right moment to maximize pressure on the piston. Testing and proof. The result was torque, lots of it. Brock didn't have a dyno, but he had something better. Real-world testing by farmers and contractors who measured performance in hay bales moved and loads hauled. These weren't scientific instruments. They were better. They were real life. A stock 272 Y block made about 240 pound-feet of torque at 2,000 RPM. With Brock's $5 modification, customers reported it felt like 350 to 400. They weren't measuring with gauges. They were measuring with work accomplished. Loads that used to make the engine bog down suddenly moved smoothly. Hills that required downshifting became easy cruises. Trailers that dragged the truck to a crawl now followed effortlessly behind. The farmers were the best judges. These guys knew their equipment intimately. They could feel when something changed. Ed Wilson, that first customer, came back 2 weeks later with 5 of his neighbors. All of them had Ford trucks. All of them wanted what Wilson had. They'd seen him pulling loads that shouldn't have been possible. They wanted in. But anecdotal evidence only goes so far. Customers saying it feels faster doesn't mean much to skeptics. Brock needed proof. Real, measurable, undeniable proof. That's where Jim Reynolds came in. Reynolds was a local legend in the tractor pulling circuit. He'd been competing for years with moderate success. His pulling truck was a stripped-down F-Series with a stock 272Y block. Factory everything. Reynolds was getting beaten regularly by guys running Chevys and Chryslers. Not close finishes either. He was getting embarrassed. Dead last in his weight class more times than he wanted to admit. The tractor pulling crowd is merciless. Losing is one thing. Losing consistently is another. Reynolds was ready to sell the truck and build something with a Chevy engine. That's when someone told him about Brock's modification. Reynolds was skeptical. He'd tried everything. Multiple carburetors, different gear ratios, various tire combinations. Nothing worked. The Ford just didn't have the low-end grunt needed for pulling, but he was desperate. He brought the truck to Brock on a Tuesday morning. Brock did his thing. The spacer went on. The distributor came out, got recurved, went back in. Initial timing got bumped up 4 degrees. Total time, maybe 45 minutes. Reynolds paid his $5 and left, thinking he'd just wasted his money. That Friday night, Reynolds competed at the county fairgrounds, the same track where he'd been losing all season, the same competitors who'd been beating him, the same weather conditions, everything identical except Brock's modification. Reynolds hooked up to the sled, dropped the clutch. The truck lunged forward like it had been shot from a cannon. The front end lifted, the tires bit, the sled started moving, and kept moving. Reynolds pulled farther than he'd ever pulled in his life, won his weight class. Wasn't even close, dominated. The following week, different track, same result. First place. Week 3, another win. The Chevy guys were losing their minds. What did you do to that thing? Reynolds just smiled. Nobody believed it was a $5 modification. They accused him of engine swaps, hidden nitrous, illegal fuel. Reynolds offered to let them inspect the truck. Stock 272. Factory block, factory heads, factory everything, except a carburetor spacer and distributor springs. Reynolds had a buddy, a guy named Tommy Chen, who ran a small performance shop with a chassis dyno. Chen had been following Reynolds' sudden winning streak. He wanted numbers, real numbers, not just pulling results, but actual measured torque output. Chen offered to dyno the truck for free if Reynolds would let him publish the results. They pulled the truck into Chen's shop on a Monday morning. First, they tested it with the modifications removed. Back to stock configuration. The dyno runs were methodical. Same RPM pulls, same load, same ambient temperature. The stock engine made 237 pound-feet of torque at 2,000 RPM. Respectable, but not impressive, Chen recorded everything. Then they reinstalled Brock's modifications. The spacer went back on. The recurved distributor went back in. Initial timing back to 10 degrees before top dead center. They fired it up and strapped it to the dyno again. A same operator, same procedures, same everything. The first pull showed 372 pound-feet at 2,000 RPM. Chen thought the dyno was miscalibrated. They recalibrated and ran it again. Same result, 372. They let the engine cool completely and ran a third test, 372. Chen did the math. That's a 57% increase, 57% from a $5 spacer, and 30 minutes of distributor work. He made Reynolds verify the cost, $5, including labor. Reynolds showed him Brock's receipt. $5 even. Let that sink in for a second. A small-town mechanic with no engineering degree had just increased low-end torque by more than half using pocket change. Meanwhile, Ford's engineering department, with millions in funding and dozens of degreed engineers, had designed an engine that left this much performance on the table. The dyno sheet became famous in pulling circles. Chen posted it in his shop. Customers took photos. The photos spread through the racing community like wildfire. That dyno sheet proved what everyone had been seeing but couldn't quantify. Brock's modification wasn't just making engines feel faster, it was making them legitimately, measurably, dramatically faster, where it mattered most. Down low, where real work happened. The numbers that shocked Detroit. Hot Rod magazine got wind of the dyno numbers. They sent a writer to Toledo in 1957. The article ran in the September issue. Ford dealer mechanic discovers torque, secret Detroit, missed. It should have been a bombshell. Instead, it was mostly ignored. The few readers who tried it reported the same gains, but the mainstream automotive press treated it like folk magic, backyard voodoo, not real engineering. Ford's engineering department did take notice, though. Internal memos from 1957, released years later through a lawsuit, showed they tested Brock's modification. The results matched the dyno numbers. One engineer wrote, "Simple carburetor, spacer, and distributor modification yields 50 to 60% torque increase at engine speeds below 2,500 RPM, with no measurable increase in emissions or fuel consumption. Recommend further study." The recommendation went nowhere. Why? Corporate politics and warranty fears. If Ford officially acknowledged that a $5 modification could double low-end torque, they'd have to explain why their multi-million-dollar engineering department missed it. Worse, they'd face warranty claims from every customer who'd complained about poor towing performance. Easier to ignore it and hope it went away. Ford's internal panic. It almost did go away. By 1960, fuel injection was on the horizon. Engineering was moving toward computer-controlled timing. The idea of recurving distributors and adding spacers seemed quaint, old-fashioned. Hot rodders still did it, but mainstream mechanics forgot about it. The drag racing community loved Brock's trick, though. Small block Chevys, which had similar low-end torque issues, responded even better than Ford Y blocks. A properly recurved distributor with a 1-inch phenolic spacer became standard practice for street strip cars in the early 60s. Racers didn't care why it worked, they just knew it did. Cost analysis makes the story even more remarkable. A phenolic carburetor spacer in 1956 cost $2 wholesale. Brock charged $5 installed, which included the distributor work. For comparison, Ford's official solution to low-end torque complaints was to recommend the optional 312 cubic inch V8, which added $275 to the purchase price of the truck. Think about that. Ford wanted customers to pay $275 for a bigger engine. Brock could give them better low-end torque for $5. The price difference was 55 to 1, and customers who'd already bought the 272 couldn't exactly exchange it for a 312. Brock's modification was their only option. The racing world discovers gold tractor pullers adopted at wholesale. The pulling circuit in the Midwest became a testing ground for the modification. Pullers experimented with different spacer heights, different distributor curves, different combinations. They found that 2 inches was optimal for most applications. More than that, and you started losing top-end power. Less than 1 inch, and the effect was minimal. The racing results were equally dramatic. Jim Reynolds, that tractor puller, didn't just win his weight class 3 weeks in a row. He moved up a weight class and kept winning. His 272 powered truck was pulling against guys with a Chrysler Hemis and big block Chevys, and winning. Because in tractor pulling, low-end torque is everything. Top-end horsepower means nothing when you're moving at 3 miles per hour. Drag racers found different benefits. The improved offline torque meant better 60-foot times. A stock Y-block powered Ford would 60 foot in around 2.2 seconds. With Brock's modification, that dropped to 1.9. Doesn't sound like much until you realize that 3/10 improvement in the 60-foot translated to almost a half-second improvement in quarter-mile times. One racer, a guy named Danny Morris out of Michigan, ran a 55 Ford with a stock 272. Before Brock's modification, best quarter-mile time was 16.8 seconds at 79 miles per hour. After the $5 trick, 16.3 at 81 miles per hour. Same car, same driver, same track, same day. Half a second faster from a carburetor spacer and distributor work. The technical deep dive. Here's what actually happens inside the engine. Most people think carburetor spacers just add volume, giving the mixture more room to atomize. That's part of it, but not the main benefit. The real magic is in mixture velocity and momentum. When you crack the throttle on a stock engine, air starts moving through the carburetor venturi. The fuel is pulled from the jets and mixed with the air. But in a short intake runner, that mixture doesn't have time to fully atomize before it hits the intake valve. Large fuel droplets enter the combustion chamber, burn incompletely, and waste energy. Add a spacer, and you increase the distance that mixture travels. More time to atomize means smaller fuel droplets. Smaller droplets mean more complete combustion. More complete combustion means more pressure on the piston. More pressure means more torque. But there's another effect. The spacer creates a plenum chamber, a small reservoir of air-fuel mixture right under the carburetor. This plenum acts as a buffer, smoothing out pulses from individual cylinders, drawing air. The result is more consistent mixture distribution across all cylinders. Instead of some cylinders running rich and others lean, they all get a more uniform mixture. Now add the distributor modification. The factory advance curve on these engines was designed for one specific scenario: avoiding detonation on low-octane fuel at high load. Conservative timing prevents knock, but it leaves performance everywhere else on the table. By bringing advance in sooner and setting it more aggressively at low RPM, you're lighting that improved mixture at exactly the right moment. Think about the physics. The piston is coming up on the compression stroke, the mixture is being compressed, pressure is building. If you light the mixture too late, the piston is already past top dead center and heading back down before peak cylinder pressure occurs. You're literally fighting the force you're trying to harness. Light it earlier, and peak cylinder pressure occurs right at top dead center, or just after. Now all that force is pushing the piston down, not fighting it. The difference in torque output is massive. We're talking about fundamental thermodynamic efficiency here. Ford's engineers knew all this, obviously. They designed conservative timing curves because they had to account for the worst-case scenario. Gas stations selling 87-octane swill that would detonate if you looked at it wrong. But most gas was better than that. Most drivers use 90 or 91 octane. Ford's timing curve was leaving 10 to 15 degrees of advance on the table at low RPM. Brock's distributor modification was simple. He'd remove the distributor, disassemble it on his workbench, and modify the mechanical advance mechanism. The factory springs were heavy, requiring lots of RPM to overcome them. He'd replace them with lighter springs from a Chevrolet distributor that happened to be the same size. This allowed advance to come in at 1200 RPM instead of 1800. He'd also weld small stops inside the distributor to limit total advance. The factory setup would run up to 36 degrees total advance at high RPM. Way too much for low-octane fuel. Brock limited it to 32 degrees, which was safe even on pump gas. But the critical change was getting that advance to arrive earlier. Initial timing went from 6 degrees before top dead center to 10 degrees. Combined with the quicker mechanical advance, the engine was seeing 22 to 24 degrees of advance by 2000 RPM instead of the factory's 14 to 16 degrees. That 8-degree difference sounds small. In reality, it's the difference between adequate torque and neck-snapping response. The beauty of the modification was its reversibility. Don't like it? Unbolt the spacer, put the original distributor springs back, return initial timing to stock. 5 minutes of work and you're back to factory specs. This made it perfect for dealers who were nervous about warranty issues. They could install it on customer cars, and if Ford ever complained, they could remove it before the inspector arrived. Modern rediscovery and applications. The professional engineering community eventually caught up. A Society of Automotive Engineers paper, published in 1962, studied carburetor spacer effects on mixture distribution. The researchers, probably without knowing about Brock, confirmed everything he'd discovered empirically. Spacers improved atomization, increased mixture velocity, and provided more uniform distribution. Their conclusion: significant torque improvements possible with minimal cost investment. By then, Brock had moved on. He'd sold the dealership in 1959 and retired. He never patented the modification, never tried to commercialize it, just quietly helped a few thousand Ford owners get better performance from their trucks, and went about his life. The modification lived on in hot rod culture, but faded from mainstream consciousness. Modern engine builders rediscovered it in the 2000s. Guys building retro street rods with Y blocks or early small block Chevys started experimenting with period-correct modifications. They dyno-tested carburetor spacers and found, sure enough, the effect was real. Forums filled with confirmation. 50 to 60% torquey gains at low RPM were consistently achievable. Some modern engine builders have taken it further, Computer-controlled distributors can now optimize the advance curve more precisely than Brock ever could with mechanical springs. CNC machine spacers can have carefully designed internal contours that further improve mixture flow. But the basic principle remains the same: increase mixture quality, optimize ignition timing, win. What's fascinating is how this applies to modern engines. Fuel injection has made carburetor spacers obsolete, but the principle hasn't changed. The relationship between mixture quality and ignition timing is still fundamental to torque and stick production. A modern engine management systems spend enormous computing power optimizing this relationship in real time. Programmable ECUs let tuners adjust timing maps with the same philosophy Brock used. Bring advance in earlier, at low RPM, limit total advance to prevent detonation. Optimize for the fuel actually being used rather than worst-case scenarios. The $5 trick lives on in $1,000 laptop computers running engine management software. The lesson here isn't really about the technical modification, it's about innovation and institutions. Ford employed hundreds of engineers with advanced degrees. They had unlimited budgets, sophisticated testing equipment, and decades of accumulated knowledge. They designed an engine that underperformed in exactly the situation most customers actually used it. One dealer mechanic with a high school education, armed with a hacksaw and an open mind, identified the problem and solved it for $5. The institution failed. The individual succeeded. This pattern repeats throughout automotive history. Hot rodders discover things Detroit misses. Racers develop techniques that eventually become mainstream. Garage mechanics solve problems that stumped engineering departments. Why does this happen? Partly it's because institutions are conservative. They're designed to minimize risk, not maximize innovation. An engineer at Ford who proposed aggressive timing curves would face scrutiny. What about warranty claims? What about detonation? What about liability? Easier to design conservatively and let performance suffer. Partly it's because institutions lose touch with real-world use. Ford's engineers tested the Y block on dynamometers at specific RPM points. They measured peak horsepower and called it good. They didn't spend time talking to farmers about lugging down under load or contractors about offline acceleration with trailers. Brock did. He had to. His customers complained directly to him. And partly it's because sometimes genius doesn't require credentials. Brock didn't need to understand the thermodynamic equations governing combustion efficiency. He just needed to notice that mixture preparation affected performance and timing affected mixture utilization. He experimented, measured results, refined the approach. That's engineering without the degree. The disappearance of this knowledge represents a broader loss. As engines became more complex, as fuel injection replaced carburetors, as computers took over timing control, a whole generation of mechanical knowledge became obsolete. Or so we thought. In reality, the principles remain valid. We've just automated them. Modern mechanics can't recurve a distributor because there are no distributors to recurve. They can't add a carburetor spacer because there are no carburetors. But they can reprogram ECUs to achieve the same effects Brock discovered. The tools changed. The physics didn't. What's truly remarkable is how completely this story was forgotten. Ray Brock isn't in any automotive history books. His name doesn't appear in Hot Rod Hall of Fame lists. The September 1957 Hot Rod article isn't considered important automotive journalism. Yet his $5 modification probably influenced tens of thousands of engines over the years. Think about all the mechanics who read that article and tried it, all the racers who adopted it, all the hot rodders who made it standard practice. The knowledge spread through word of mouth, through magazine articles, through one guy telling another guy at the drag strip. No formal channels, no official recognition, just mechanical wisdom passing from wrench to wrench. This is how real innovation often works, not through corporate research departments or university labs, but through practitioners solving immediate problems with available resources. Brock didn't set out to revolutionize engine tuning. He just wanted his customers to stop complaining about their trucks. The revolution happened accidentally. Today, a phenolic spacer for a Y-block Ford costs about $30. A quality distributor recurve kit runs another $50. $80 total to double your low-end torque. The ratio of cost to benefit might be the best in all of automotive modification history. Spend $80, gain 150 pound-feet of torque. Show me another modification with that return on investment. The question isn't whether it works. That's been proven repeatedly since 1956. The question is why it took a dealer mechanic to discover it, and why institutional memory failed so completely that it had to be rediscovered decades later. The answer reveals something uncomfortable about how innovation actually happens versus how we think it happens. We want to believe that progress comes from prestigious institutions, that advanced degrees produce superior results, that bigger budgets mean better outcomes. Ray Brock proves otherwise. Sometimes the best solution comes from the guy who has to face the consequences of failure. Sometimes $5 and a hacksaw beat $1 million research budget. The Ford Y-block story is about more than engine modifications. It's about the gap between engineering theory and practical reality. It's about institutions missing what individuals see clearly. It's about the difference between designing for specifications and designing for users. Ford designed an engine that met their performance targets on paper. Brock modified it to meet actual human needs. Every time someone bolts a spacer onto a carburetor or adjusts a timing curve, they're following Brock's path. They're saying the factory didn't optimize for my use case, so I'll optimize it myself. That spirit, that willingness to experiment and modify, built the entire hot rod movement. It created the aftermarket performance industry. It's why small shops can sometimes outperform major manufacturers. The $5 trick isn't just a footnote in automotive history. It's proof that the best ideas don't always come from expected places. That expertise isn't always academic. That sometimes the guy with grease under his fingernails knows more than the guy with a degree on the wall. It's a reminder that we should listen to practitioners, trust empirical results, and never assume the factory got it right. Ray Brock probably never thought he was making history. He was just trying to help Ed Wilson pull his hay wagon. But in doing so, he exposed a fundamental flaw in how Detroit approached engineering. He proved that real-world performance matters more than theoretical specifications. And he created a legacy that continues today every time someone optimizes an engine for torque instead of accepting what the manufacturer provided. That's the real lesson. Don't accept mediocrity just because it's official. Don't assume experts know everything. And never underestimate what one person with a problem, a handful of tools, and the willingness to experiment can accomplish. Sometimes changing the world costs exactly $5 and requires nothing more than the courage to try.